Everybody, back here for our fourth lesson in the Bala Sulam's Matan Torah with commentary by Rabbi Avraham Mordechai Gottlieb, what we're referring to as the Rebbe Shlita. Shlita being a title for respect and saying that he should live long, to 120. A quick summary for what we've covered so far is that the main mitzvah of the Torah is loving your neighbor as yourself. And the biggest refinement that we could ask for, the biggest merit we could ask for, is to be involved in Torah and mitzvot, because that's what refines us, and that's what gives us merit. But the merit itself is the refinement which brings us to exalted levels of spiritual consciousness. Also, we spoke about rising above our understanding, because our understanding is intrinsically flawed and connected to our ego. We spoke about Hillel and the aspiring convert, who spoke about the lower level of loving your neighbor as yourself, meaning don't do to the other what is hateful to you. We spoke about legs being afflictions and pleasures being two different dynamics in our consciousness that bring us from state to state. Either suffering pushes us from one state to the other, or pleasure pulls us towards a different reality. And then our inner work is all relative. We're all unique beings on a unique journey. We want to change things, but the system is divine. The system is put in place, so it's not upon us to reform or reconstruct such divine systems. Rather, be connected to the unbroken tradition since Matan Torah itself. And then the last class, we spoke a lot about consciousness, quantum physics, and the relationship between thoughts and intention and actually co-creating and affecting reality, and how important it is for us to have a group of friends that have a concentrated effort to give to each other and to be involved in the work of thoughts, speech, and action that train oneself and habituates oneself to be more giving and therefore more godlike, because God is only giving. In this class, we're going to be speaking about the notion of the Hebrew slave. The bullet point is, I must even give precedence to others' needs before my own. As a preface, Hebrew slave is a very different idea than how most people understand what slavery is. I think indentured servant is a closer definition or understanding of what a Hebrew slave is. But bear with me, we'll get into the deep psychological intricacy of what it means to have a slave and how you actually become the slave and the slave becomes the master. The Bala Sulam begins. As if this weren't enough, I point out the straightforward meaning of this commandment to love others is even more demanding, for it requires us to give precedence to others' needs before our own. Similarly, a Tosfot commentary in Masechet Kedushin 20a cites the Jerusalem Talmud on the verse regarding a Hebrew slave, quote, "For it is good for him with you," end quote, from Devarim or Deuteronomy 15:16, and states, quote, "Sometimes a master of a slave has only one cushion, and if he lies on the cushion himself and does not give it to the slave, then he doesn't fulfill the obligation of, quote, for it is good for him with you," end quote. Just to clarify, what I just read is from Devarim or Deuteronomy. The notion of Hebrew slave being for it is good for him with you is what the Jerusalem Talmud is citing. The Bala Sulam says, since he is lying on a cushion and a slave is on the ground, answering the notion of how it must be good for him, and we are supposed to give our slave the only pillow, assuming we have just one. The Bala Sulam says, if he does not lie on the cushion, but also does not give it to his slave, then he acts with the character of Sodom, or Sodom. The translator adds, where guests were not welcomed, even though the Sodomites would not have lost anything by sharing with them. So I'll add that essentially this character trait of Sodom is what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. You got into their domain and everything you own was theirs. And that's the characteristic of wickedness, or being severely unaligned with source, which is the characteristic of Israel, Yashar Kale, straight to God, whose characteristic is what's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. Because that is denoted by giving strictly for the sake of the other being both the creator and all of humanity, because the creator is enveloped within humanity. So I think I'd like to take a moment to speak about the notion of society, since we're talking about Sodom and Israel as character traits. The Rebbe Shlita says in page 2 of Inner Work, which can be downloaded for free at KabbalahArt.com. I also recommend those listening to check out the description of the video. There's some great resources, links to books that we're referencing here, and the free books for download on the PDFs. So the Rebbe Shlita says, since most people are not yet yearning to connect with God, the goal of creating a just society is enough for them. If we are only connected with a just society, however, we will never attain one. This is because a just society is not enough of a goal to motivate all of us to overcome our self-centeredness. We see this. If, however, the goal is attaining union with the creator of the world, then there is motivation to do even the hardest things. We see in society today, as the Rebbe says, that no system has worked, no system has lasted, everything is in an evolution and it's constantly shifting. And society seems to focus on receiving. And even if there is a lofty goal of building a just society, that reality, even if it was to be manifested, is not enough. Like we mentioned in a prior class regarding the legs, one being afflictions, one being pleasure, defining the abstract concepts that shift our reality, whether through suffering or the pleasure that we want to manifest. The pleasure of unifying with the Creator, as we understand it through our tradition, is the absolute greatest pleasure that anyone can imagine, and it's truly incomprehensible. In contrast to just building a just society, it always falls and crumbles because people's egos get involved. And when you have a society that's not based on the notions of refinement, in essence, the notions of the Torah of coming to love your neighbor as yourself, then it will fall. It must. It's a spiritual principle. The only thing that's divine and is lasting is anything that truly has the Creator's will within it. The Creator's will is that we love each other and focus on uniting with Him. So if a society is built off of the opposite, or a lack thereof, naturally, it would fall. The Bala Sulam continues. Thus, he must give the cushion to the slave, and the master himself must lie on the ground. Carefully examine the Tosfot commentary at the reference. Tosfot is commentary on the Talmud. If I'm not mistaken, it's grandsons of Rashi, who was also an amazing, very special, very holy commentator on the Talmud and the Chumash, the 5 books of the Torah. So I looked up this Tosfos, and it had a lot of the same references that we're speaking of here, but it wanted to clarify that good with you, meaning it must be good with you, the slave must be good with you, implies equal treatment in all dimensions, in food, drink, sleep. But, like we mentioned, assuming there's one pillow, the slave gets preference. So not only is it equal treatment, even more so, it's better treatment. We're expected to treat them better. Amazing. Some food for thought. There is a story in the Talmud, in Masechet Bava Metzia, page 62a, where a case of if two people are stranded in the desert and they only have one flask, one bottle of water, who drinks? Interestingly, though it is an argument, like most things in the Talmud, it's a debate for the sake of heaven, trying to figure out the truth and what the Creator's will is in any given situation. And the truth is, all opinions are correct generally. It's all relative depending on the person's spiritual state or society's spiritual state. With that said, the law is that if you have the drink and you're stranded in the desert with this other person, you drink it. You have to prioritize your life over theirs. But here we see that if we have a slave, we are to give them equal, plus everything is equivalent that they receive, and even more so. If we have just one pillow, for example, we give them even more. In many cases, from my understanding, in the times of the Talmudic era, these servants would also be given wives, and the children would grow up and also be fed and completely taken care of by the master. It's an amazing thing. It's very, very far from what we understand it to be today. And essentially, these servants, these indentured servants, were given an opportunity to rehabilitate. This was their jail, in essence, to be put into a person's home and being taken care of, to be put to work and actually get paid, let alone food, drink, sleep, and even given a family. It's mind-boggling. I don't think there's anything like that today. I could be wrong. The Bala Sulam continues. We thus learn to apply the same ruling to our verse regarding the extent of loving others. Also here, Scripture has equated the fulfilling of your fellow's needs with the fulfilling of your own needs, as in the example of the Hebrew slave in, quote, "For it is good for him with you." If you only have one cushion and someone else has no cushion at all, the ruling of Jewish law must be that if you sit on it and don't give it to the other person, you thereby violate the positive commandment of, quote, "and love your fellow as yourself." As you have not fulfilled the needs of your fellow to the degree that you fulfilled your own needs. If you neither sit on the cushion nor give it to the other person, then this is wickedness, as in the characteristic of Sodom or Sodom. Rather, you must give the cushion to the other person to sit upon, and you yourself must either sit on the ground or stand. And it is self-evident that this rule applies to all cases where a person has something that someone else lacks. Now go and consider, is it at all possible to fulfill this commandment? Similar to how we ended the last section of the Bala Sulam's wording in the third lesson, where he's actually the Rebbe Shlita says in the commentary of the last part, how is it possible to do this in reality? Meaning to truly love the other and totally fulfill all their needs when we can barely fulfill our own. So the Rebbe Shlita begins. The rest of the lesson is going to be his commentary on this section, clarifying the notion of caring for the other, referencing this master and slave dynamic. The Rebbe Shlita says, from the example of the Hebrew slave, we learn that the needs of your fellow take precedence over your own needs. The Jewish concept of slavery is very different from the way most people think of slavery. Our sages state, quote, "A person who acquires a slave is like one who acquires a master." End quote, from Kedushin 20a of the Talmud. The mitzvot of the Torah are so potent that the slave is turned into a master and the master into a slave. If the master has a single cushion, the Torah obligates the master to give it to the slave, and the master lies on the ground. When the master has only one cushion, what takes precedence? That it be good for him, meaning good for the slave, or with you, meaning good for the master? The mitzvah of the Torah is that good for him overrides with you. The slave takes preference, or the friend takes preference. The other takes preference. than ourselves. From this requirement of Jewish law regarding the Hebrew slave, Bala Sulam draws a conclusion regarding the general character of the mitzvah and love your fellow as yourself. The two mitzvot have the same structure, for with you speaks of what is good for the master, and it is good for him with you says that in whatever way it may be well with the master, so it must be well with the slave. This is also precisely the structure of and love your fellow as yourself. Namely, just as yourself, you take care that you'll have maximum pleasure. So for your fellow, you must endure his or her maximum pleasure. And just as Tosfot concluded, the master must give preference to the other. So in general, each of us must give preference to the other. Practically speaking, if you have fresh food and also food that is not fresh, you must give your friend the fresh food, for you must give preference to your friend's needs. When we have an ordinary guest, we are likely to prefer to give the guest the leftovers so we can get rid of them. However, we must be prepared to wholeheartedly give preference to the needs of the other, and always take for ourselves what is lesser quality and give our friends what is higher quality. Regarding gifts to the priest, the law requires giving the choice meat. Again, since all the Torah comes to clarify the commandment of and love your fellow as yourself, we learn the requirement of giving our friend the best portion from the example of gifts to the priest. Everything is about loving your neighbor, loving the other. It's a broken record, but seemingly there's an issue in people's inner work when things seem so obvious, so understandable, like self-reflection and self-criticism, reviewing one's actions, and loving the other. In theory, it seems so straightforward and so logical that we think it's already ingrained, but it's far from. We need to be learning this. We need to be involved in this in a concentrated manner so that it seeps in, it sinks in. It needs to become a part of us. So, interestingly, the notion of the priests getting the choice meat, but so too, the Creator told us that we are to be a nation of priests. The Creator loves all of humanity equally. We'll speak more about that in a future lesson, about how it's madness to assume that the Creator has any preference for any nation. We're simply projecting that reality because we have preferences. The Creator, how can He? But we'll get into that. It's a very interesting conversation. So if the priests are serving the nation of Israel, so too the nation of Israel are the priests and are serving humanity, giving them the tools and the teachings that we're speaking about here, about refinement and how to step above understanding. So the Rebbe Shlita continues. Question: from where can we get the motivation and energy to follow this pure path? I just want to say, because the Bala Sulam has stated that it seems impossible. So how can we follow such a thing? Answer: we need to get used to thinking of each individual as a great person. Therefore, we must contemplate the inner life of other people, to consider that each person is a portion of God and activated by God's will. These thoughts can give us a push to operate according to the principle of selfless giving, since there is great pleasure in giving to a great person. Makes so much sense. How many of us would do so much? We probably would give money to be able to serve our favorite celebrity or athlete, or our favorite gadol, these Torah experts, Torah scholars and sages. We would actually be the ones receiving pleasure from the service. So why not? Why not exaggerate in our minds the importance of everyone else so that we can serve them and help them and be there for them. It gives us power, because as we said in the last lesson, everything is drawing from consciousness. It's a main key of attaching our thoughts to God, attaching our thoughts to giving and loving, and putting it into action. I'd like to quote another piece from Inner Work by the Rebbe Shlita regarding this amazing idea. From the first page, there are those who say that since God is universal, with God's glory filling all the world, then all of God's glory does not rest in any individual person, but that some of God's glory is in each person. This is not the case, however, because the spiritual does not divide into parts. In each and every person is the entirety of God and all of God's glory. So I think it's important to say that the Hebrew is glory. Glory is like respect. It's kavod. We're not saying that God is in a person. God forbid. We're not saying that. We don't believe that. But God is in all people, and His glory, His goodness, His awe is within each and every person. Because yes, their soul is a portion from on high, so to speak. That doesn't mean that they are God themselves. God forbid. So if every person has this amazing spark within them, and all of God's glory is in every person, then to the point of the Rebbe Shlita here, we should be treating every person as a great individual, and that'll give us the power and the inspiration to serve them. Furthermore, the direction is to arrive at acquiring a godlike character. Just as God's care and giving are concentrated only on what is good for us, and God receives nothing for His own benefit, so we are commanded to arrive at a state in which we are focused on the other, so that the other will be the center of our lives. I want to go as far as to say that if we were to imagine the other person in the most exaggerated manner, if it's a man, imagine that they're the Mashiach. If it's a woman, it could be the Mashiach's wife, for example. Then we would do so much for that person. We'd be so much goodness to ourselves by serving them and habituating ourselves to give. And even as I say that, entertain treating someone like that, I can feel like my ego going, just attacking me and popping up and saying, what? That's ridiculous. You don't have to do that. It's a war. It's a constant war, this inner work between this will to receive and the will to give. It's a holy war, and it should be fun. It should be good. And it becomes as such when we have tools, when we have a community, when we have friends, when we have a spiritual sage and leader. And with that said, Rabbi Shlita says, according to Judaism, our spiritual level is measured by how much we are aware of our selfishness and how humble we are. So if we can humble ourselves and understand this level of selfishness, then perhaps we can also serve the other better. Rabbi Shlita continues, thus, if we go on this path, we will be connected with the Creator of all there is. And there is no source of energy greater than this. Because the Creator is the life of all lives. He is the source of everything, all energy, all goodness, every minutia, from a leaf falling on the street, a dog barking, to the wars of the world and all the redemptions that have come and will finish. Everything is coming from the Creator. A quick story. The Rabbi Shlita said in the 14 years that he was attached to the Rabbi Shlita, Rabbi Baruch Shalom Halevi Ashlak Zatzal, he never saw him sleep for 14 years. And this holy man would sleep perhaps 3-4 hours a night. He would be in the Beit Midrash, he would be in the study hall by 1 a.m., ready to learn and ready to teach. And he was never seen to be falling asleep. And he was very tired. That was clarified. He was tired, don't get us wrong. And that's someone who was connected to the life of all lives. Despite the tiredness, such an individual has all the power they need to get through the day. The Rebbe Shlita continues, why do we really need to give preference to other people's needs above our own? The verse seems only to equate our needs when it states, quote, and love your fellow as yourself. However, even this simple meaning of the mitzvah creates an obligation to be strict and give preference to the needs of our friend. For when you want to straighten a bent metal rod, you need to bend it to the opposite side. We see that Judaism is not so simple, for it deals with something beyond our nature. It's not just a matter of phylacteries, being tefillin, that a man puts on each morning, or following the laws of an automatic clock on Shabbat. That is the simple execution of certain acts according to religious requirements. For it is in our power to perform religious actions, but in order to change our desires, we need the help of God. We see that these acts are not the goal, but the means to arrive at the goal. Changing our nature from self-love to love of the other. In the Talmud, Kedushin 30b, God is described as saying, quote, I created the evil inclination, and I created the Torah as a healing condiment for it. This is similar to what we've said. Being man is born like a wild donkey. We're born with the animal nature, our chomer, our raw material that we have to refine to become more human, to become more divine, and reveal the divinity within us, reveal the giving and the loving nature within us. The external form of fulfilling Torah and mitzvot is not the end of the trail. Rather, the end is attaining a change of nature by means of the Torah and mitzvot. This is the uniqueness of Judaism and the people of Israel. Thus, the people of Israel kept on going because throughout their history, they were more or less moving in this direction beyond the selfish nature of people. Regarding this, it is said, quote, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, end quote, from Devarim or Deuteronomy 4:6. Your is referring to Israel, which is again Yashar Kel, straight to God, intention to give and to love and to truly serve. And the nations, it's a code word for the ego. It's those wills to receive within oneself that we're attempting to convert. We need to bring those inner nations over to our inner Hillel in order that they become refined and become straight to God. And the last note regarding the quote from the Talmud I just stated, with the evil inclination being created by the Creator and Him creating the Torah as a healing condiment for it. Condiment, something you add to food, no? It's also been translated as spice or drug or medicine. But it doesn't say it's the cure, because we're not removing our raw material. We're actually not removing our ego. We're not removing the raw material we're receiving. Rather, it's a condiment. We're sprinkling the sparks and aspects of giving. We're creating a fusion. We're refining to become only giving and loving. So eventually we can reach the ultimate point, which we'll probably speak about in a future class, of being able to actually receive in order to give, which is connoted as the highest level. For example, your grandma gives you an ugly sweater and you receive it anyways and put it on despite all its itchiness. And you say, wow, grandma, thank you so much. And you're giving to her by receiving the gift. Or going to a Shabbat table. You say, wow, this food is so good. Because the host wants to give the guest all the goodness. So too in life. This is a meal where the guest and the Creator is the host, and He wants to give us infinite goodness at His eternal banquet. But we have to refine ourselves in order to taste it, in order to give to Him and not for ourselves. Looking forward till next time, we're going to be speaking about why Israel was chosen to receive the Torah, or at least planting the seeds as to why that is, and asking questions, which are themselves seeds and vessels, to get to the answer. Because every question is a vessel. If you have any questions, my email should be at the bottom of the description. I'm happy to help anyone with any of these resources or any questions regarding this teaching or this school of thought. And wishing you all the best. Till next time.